Revelation chapter 2. We're thankful to be in the service again tonight. We're glad to see each one that is here. Appreciate you being here. I know that we've got a lot out traveling and some sick in different places tonight. So let's remember all of them as well. Revelation chapter 2. We're going to begin reading in verse 12. Revelation chapter 2. We'll begin reading in verse 12. We're going to look for at least just a few minutes to begin with. We're going to look at the letter to the church at Pergamos. And then there's a statement that Christ makes in here that we're going to focus on as we move forward. Let's begin in verse 12. And to the angel of the church of Pergamos write, these things saith he which hath the sharp sword with two edges. I know thy works, and where thou dwellest, even where Satan's seat is. And thou holdest fast my name, and hast not denied my faith, even in those days wherein Antipas was my faithful martyr, who was slain among you, where Satan dwelleth. But I have a few things against thee, because thou hast there them that hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to cast a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed unto idols, and to commit fornication. So hast thou also them that hold the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which thing I hate. Repent, or else I will come unto thee quickly, and fight against them with the sword of my mouth. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. To him that overcometh will I give to eat of the hidden manna, and will give him a white stone, and in the stone, a new name written, which no man knoweth, saving he that receiveth it. I'm going to stop there in verse 17. That's reading the entirety of the letter here to the church at Pergamos. Now, Pergamos was a city, of course, in Asia. If you look at a map, when you look at a modern day map, don't think Asia from modern day. Modern day Asia and biblical Asia were two completely different areas. In fact, the area of Galatia was west of the area of Asia during the time of Paul's missionary journeys and the time of the letters being written. There were of course, quite a few churches in Asia. There were some things that were going on. Ephesus, of course, was one of the churches you can find in 1 Timothy, and Paul writing to Timothy some things about the churches in Asia. And so if you'll refer to your map in the Bible, you can kind of get an idea of where Asia was at. It's just south of what would be modern-day Greece. I didn't look up the exact location. I think it may be Turkey, somewhere. Somebody, you correct me if I'm wrong in that. But Pergamos was a city in Asia at that time. And the city here at Pergamos is, I want you to notice what he says about it. He says in verse 13, he says, I know thy works, and where thou dwellest, even where Satan's seat is. And we probably all heard that statement before, and somebody talking about the church, and they'll say, well, you know where Satan's seat is, and sometimes they'll say it and maybe refer to a person, which is a nice thing to do. And then there, a lot of times, I don't know, maybe it wasn't used as I heard it growing up, but when I heard it growing up, it was used in relation in the sense that we all gather here to church, and when we gather here to church, Satan comes in separately, and nobody can see him, but Satan's got a place. And there's a seat that Satan's in the church, and he's always here, and he's trying to tear us up, and he's always in there meddling, and there's a seat there. And that's kind of the idea that I was told, growing up. Well, that's not even close to what's being said. What he's talking about here is a seat of authority. Now, notice the last statement in verse 13. There's three words. The last statement, he says, who was slain among you, where Satan dwelleth. The place, the city of Pergamos, was the center of false religion at this time. It was the center of, if you will, the headquarters of Satan. Now, Sunday night, if you were here in Sunday night, we talked about some of this false doctrine because the children of Israel in Judges chapter 10 had looked back to Baal and they had looked back to Ashtaroth and were worshiping these false gods. Part of what we did Sunday nights, we went back and kind of did the history on Baal and Ashtaroth and followed them back to Egypt. In fact, you could follow them all the way back to Babylon, and we mentioned a little bit about that Sunday night. And so in Babylon, and then we talked about this magic religion that was in Egypt. Now, there was a man who actually wrote a book on it in the 1800s, and it's called the if I can say it correctly, the Mystery Babylonian Religion. And it's got some great information. It's all historical. There's no biblical perspective. It's not a biblical book, so bear that in mind. It's not anything that you could say it's inspired by any means, but it helps us kind of put together the pieces of history with these false religions. Now, the leader of this particular religion was called the Pontiff Priest, Pontiff, Pontiff Priest. You've probably heard that word before. You find him possibly in Babylon. You find him in Egypt, and then when the Grecian Empire came in and went through Egypt, he escaped to Pergamus and established a city there, a headquarters there in Pergamus, where he began to practice his religion there, and eventually moved to Rome. And this Pontiff Priest eventually united with Caesar, the leader of the Roman Empire, and would later, during the time of Constantine, maybe shortly after that, would be united with a pope. And so all of that, you kind of do the research on that, and you begin to put all of that together. And so that's what he's saying. By the way, if you want some information on that, the doctrine of Balaam is that it was a prophet for profit. In other words, that Balaam was a prophet for profit. It was a payment that the people in authority, if you will, authority type system at that time in the church were almost demanding payments. It was a type of system where they would be reimbursed. In other words, they were just being paid to do the work of the Lord. They were in it for money. That's the whole point. They were in it for money, and they had those there that were holding to that doctrine. And then verse 15, it says, "So hast thou also them that hold the doctrine of the Nicolaitans." The word Nico means leaders. The word Laotin is referring to the lay people, and it's a hierarchy system that puts a leading group in the church. Now notice that Jesus hates both of these particular doctrines. He hates any type of leadership system or classification system where there's a ruling class in the church. It was never established that way. It was never intended to be that way. There was never intended to be a ruling class in the church. There was never intended to be a payment system, if you will. It shouldn't be a man's goal to do the Lord's work for money. And so that he's fighting against, if you notice what Jesus said, he's fighting against those doctrines. By the way, all of this mysterious Babylonian religion promises knowledge. Now again, I'm getting into some history, but I'm trying to tie all this together here in just a moment. Promises knowledge. You remember what the devil promised Eve in the Garden of Eden? You shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. It was a promise of knowledge, and that through this knowledge that she would become a god. There's a lot of people in the world that still believe that through this knowledge, there's this mystical knowledge that through this knowledge they would become gods, lowercase g, gods. And anytime where you find a hierarchical system where each step in the rung you get a little bit more knowledge, usually ties back to this system in some way. Now, having said all of that, that's given us a little bit. By the way, before I leave that, notice what Jesus promises them. Verse 17, "He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. To him that overcometh will I give to eat of the hidden manna." Jesus promised them that overcome hidden knowledge. But Jesus is saying, okay, they're promising this garbage, so to speak. I'm going to give you the truth. I'm going to give you something that's spiritually discerned, which we have, which is promised in Jesus Christ. Colossians chapter 2. In Christ, there is all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. We've been given knowledge and wisdom in Jesus Christ. So all of this has been promised to us through the Lord Jesus Christ. It's been promised to these people that overcome. Now, the reason that I mention that is because I'm telling us what Satan's seat is here. It's not some mystical place in the church where Satan comes and he's just waiting for his attack. We know that the devil is going to attack the church. That's not in question. But when we think of it from that perspective, it makes us look at the devil almost from a physical perspective, and it takes the fight of the devil that we have, it takes this battle that we have with the devil from a spiritual battle that takes place in our mind to a physical battle which is taking place kind of right in this area. And when we do that, we're looking at it in a completely wrong way. And so we're looking at it as if now I have to address and I've got to fight Satan from a physical standpoint because he's here, rather than I need to be addressing and that I need to be fighting this war in a spiritual manner. Why is that important? We know good and well that Satan's going to attack the church. We know that. Now, Jesus said that he established the church upon the rock, which is himself, and then he said the gates of hell would not prevail against the church. Now, we know that the gates of hell won't prevail, but he didn't say the gates of hell would not try, and we know that the gates of hell are. That the gates of hell are doing everything they can to destroy the church. The devil is doing everything that he can to attack the church. Now, all through the New Testament, do you ever see the church under attack? And in every attack, that's a yes, in every attack that we find in the church or of the church, is it some mystical thing where we got some crazy, you almost get this idea that what they're saying is this man's going to walk in here with red horns and a pitchfork and just get ready to go to war with us. It don't work like that. We've got to understand who our enemy is. We've got to understand how he operates so that we understand how to defend ourselves from him. As a church, as a family, as an individual. And so we need to know kind of how this takes place. So there's two ways you can take every attack of Satan, every attack of our adversary, you can take and lump them into two different categories. A masculine category and a feminine category. The masculine category, it's just exactly what it sounds like. It is the use of intimidation. And Satan, when he has the ability and when he has the power, will use. That's his most form of tactic to go against the church, is intimidation. What does that mean? Every type of persecution in the Bible is intimidation. That the devil is trying to intimidate the church into doing what he would have them to do, which is ultimately turn their back on Christ. Should stop, faint, stop doing what God would have them to do. Quit on the Lord. All of that. So the devil used intimidation in order to accomplish that. Now, if intimidation don't work, he will turn to another method. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But intimidation is the main source. But the key is the devil has to have the right measures in authority in order to be able to accomplish that. That means that the devil's got to have some authority over the church. You look at Acts chapter 7, Acts chapter 8, the church is in Israel is under great persecution. Why? Because the Jews are in control of Israel. The church is a very small minority of Israel at that point, people-wise, a very small group. And so the Jews, under the legal system, are persecuting the Christians almost to the point, remember Saul of Tarsus, having the authority to kill those of the church. And because of this, again, using manipulation, the devil is trying to destroy the church right from the beginning. But really, what actually happened was through this persecution, the church was spread all over the Roman Empire, which actually was a counteraction to what the devil was trying to accomplish, which shows just the wisdom of God in that as well. But the point is that we see the devil using people to attack the church. People to attack the church. The first form is that of persecution or intimidation. Now, if intimidation don't work, or he doesn't have the authority, the power to be able to manipulate, or intimidate rather, he turns to manipulation. That's the other form of attack. So every attack of Satan can either be put into two categories: intimidation or manipulation. And if the devil cannot intimidate the church, if he don't have the power or it's not working, he will turn to manipulation. When you look at Proverbs, the talk of the strange woman, everything that the strange woman does is manipulative to those that she's trying to attack. That's why Solomon is trying to warn us of the strange woman. It looks good. It looks enticing. It appeals to us. But it is meant to harm. It's meant to manipulate. It's meant to destroy. And so he's warning us to be careful of the devil using that tactic of manipulation against us. Now, this is where we want to spend the remainder of our time, in the idea of manipulation. Because if the church is going to be manipulated, if the church is going to be attacked through manipulation, the devil is going to use people to do it. That's the whole point that I want you to take home with you. That get this, if the church is going to be attacked, if the church is going to be right here, because we don't face persecution, right? We haven't had persecution. We may get to the point where we face persecution, but we haven't thus far in a long time. Thank the Lord in America. But we may get there. Until then, you can bet the devil's going to do everything he can to manipulate us. He is going to do everything he can to manipulate us into doing what he would have us to do. Now, how does he do it? I want to talk to this. I'm going to get stretched out for a moment. Once I get this laid out, then we're going to start looking at some biblical examples of how it takes place. So when the devil begins to work on us, to entice us, even when we're tempted to sin, how does that work? Blessed is the man that endureth temptation, for when he is tried, he received a crown of life. Say not when you are tempted that you are tempted of God, for God is not tempted with evil, neither tempted he any man. But we are all tempted when we are drawn away of our own lusts. Is that all of it? And enticed. Now what does that part mean? I know what the own lust means. The own lust means what I want. The devil uses what I want against me, right? It's no different than fishing. No different than fishing. When you fish, you entice a fish based on what they want, right? You ever go fishing and you're fishing with a black worm and they're not biting it? I'm not very patient fishing. It don't take me long. I'm taking that black worm off and I'm putting something else on. I'll put on a tiny torpedo. That don't work. I'll put on a watermelon seed lizard. That don't work. I'll put on a crankbait. That don't work. I'll put on something else. But when I find something that they bite, do you change or do you keep fishing what they bite? Do you keep fishing what they bite, right? Why? Because they're biting it. You found what they liked. You found what they wanted. That's exactly the same thing that the devil does us. He may not know exactly what our lusts are, but he can throw a bait out and entice us, and it may work, it may not. But when it works, and when he figures out we have a desire for something, then that's what he's going to keep throwing at us. And he entices us based upon our lust. That's why the Bible tells us that we're drawn away of our own lust and enticed. Now, with this enticement, the devil does not force us to sin. He simply just entices us to sin. And with every temptation, God is faithful that he will make a way of escape. That's 1 Corinthians 10, chapter 13. So with every temptation, we're enticed and we're also given a way to escape. So you can't blame the devil if you sin. He might have enticed you to do it, but you can't blame him for it because you made the decision because God gave you a way out. And that's the case every time. Now, let's take that and translate it back to where we're at. The devil uses our lust, our desires, what I want against us. Now, what is the most thing that we need as a church to function properly, to work right, to operate smoothly? There's a lot of different answers, but unity. Unity, obviously in the proper place, but we have to have unity. We cannot function without it. Without unity, it's chaos. Without unity, it's disorder. We have to have unity. We can be unified as a church and go meet in the cow field out there. And we can meet 3 times a week in some chairs out there on the ground in the cow field. We don't have to have any extra programs. We don't have to do anything else. But we can teach the Word of God out in the cow field on the ground and grow because we're unified together. I'm not making a suggestion that we do that. I'm just telling us that unity is the most important thing in being ultimately unified in Christ. But that goes without saying because there's no other place to unify. So what does it mean then to have unity? That's what the devil is fighting against. And the devil uses our desires to bring strife, to break the unity of the church. Okay? So that's the key. That's what we have to understand. We need unity, but our desires will destroy that. So here's the thing. Can we be unified and all think differently? Yes, absolutely. Does it mean that when we are unified that everybody has to be on the same page? No. Everybody has something that they want, right? It's like, let's get to the simple things. What color do you want the walls to be painted if we were painting the walls? Well, I mean, you could ask everybody in the building, you'd probably get a lot of different answers because everybody would want something a little bit different. And everybody may say that they, then you maybe, if we're going to put some new lights in, what kind of chandelier? Well, everybody probably wants something a little bit different, and that's okay. We want something different. The problem is when what I want becomes more important than what you want, because I'm right. The problem is when my desire rules. The problem is when my desire causes me to break the unity of the church. You see, here's where we can unify, because everybody has an opinion, because everybody has a desire, and they're all different. The only place that we can be unified is in not my will be done. That's the only place we can come together. And not my will be done, but thy will be done. The devil, on the other hand, Christ is working that we submit and that we come to that place of not my will be done, but thy will be done. The devil, on the other hand, is working against us to entice us and to almost lead us astray that, no, look, your will not going to be done. You need to stand up for what this thing is. You need to stand up for these things. And so the devil is enticing us to stand for our own will when the Lord is leading us to submit to his. And so there you find the difference. Now the subject matter can change. You could be talking about paint. You could be talking about wall color. You could be talking about all kind of different things. But the Lord is teaching us to submit. And the devil is enticing us to stand up for our own desires, which causes strife. Okay? All in the case of things until you come to the 18 doctrines in that book. And then those 18 doctrines are a different story. That's a different story for a different day. So, Tonight, for just a few more moments, I want to go to some examples in the Bible where this is the exact thing that's taking place all through the church. Now, I can take you to a bunch of different examples of where the church was persecuted and the devil was attacking the church in that manner, but that's not what I'm going to do tonight, because we already know the devil works that way. He was attacking the church at Thessalonica. He was attacking the church at Corinth. He was attacking the church at Jerusalem. We already know those things, and those directly through persecution, but the devil was still also manipulating the church at the same time. So I want you to see that. Luke 22, I want us to see that and see what it looks like. And then tonight, as we go home, I want us to look and say, okay, am I one that's standing in the way of the church? Because I think one of the reasons, we all kind of come around and we say, well, why aren't things kind of flowing like they should? Why aren't things operating? We've seen things in the past. Maybe they're not. Maybe we're not having the unity that we have. And when we can all come together and submit, maybe we can then begin to see some things open up and begin to operate like they should and go as they should. So Luke 22 in verse 24. Luke 22, verse 24. This is a very simple one. You're all familiar with it, if I could say that correctly. But it's maybe not thought of it kind of quite in this context before. I don't know how large the church was at this time, but I know at least had 12 members, and they were probably with the Lord at this particular time. And so we're looking at the disciples. And so that's the beginnings of the early church. You've got these men with the Lord. And in verse 24 it says, and there was also a strife among them. Well, here we go. We've got a strife. We've got something that's going on. We've got a division amongst the disciples, the early church. What is this dissension about in the early church? Which of them should be accounted the greatest? This first dissension here in the early church is about, and I don't know that this was the first one, but back that up, but this dissension, this strife in the early church is about which one is going to be the greatest. Why? Why is that even a thing? Now again, they're looking to the coming of Jesus Christ. They're looking to the kingship of Jesus Christ. And their mind is, I need to be closest to Jesus so that when Christ is king, I'm the captain of the host, if you will. I'm the second most man in charge of this thing, and all these other folks around here is answering to me. I am the man of authority. I am the highest man. And so there's this dissension. Well, we know at this time 11 of them is saved, and one of them's not even saved. He's a member of the church because he's been baptized into it, but he hadn't even trusted the Lord, and that's Judas. And so there's this argument between them. And so Jesus tells them here, he says, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship. And he says, and they that exercise authority upon them are called benefactors, but ye shall not be so. What Jesus told them is that your desire is authority. That's what you want. You want authority. My will is that nobody in the church has any authority. Nobody in the church has authority. I have no authority over any other member. But we all have the authority here collectively. Every member has the same amount of authority over everyone else. I'm subject to the church. How much authority does the pastor have? And say, well, Pastor, can we do this? I had a man that tell me one day, we were walking in the church, he said, we got conference tonight. And I said, yes, sir, I do. He said, we're going to get that piano. I said, that's up to the church. That ain't up to me. I said, I tell you what I'll do. He said, what's that? I said, I'll moderate it. You make the motion. And if we get a second, I'll put it before the church and we'll have a vote. And if the church votes with majority to buy a piano, we'll get one. I said, I'm not doing anything above that. I said, that ain't my job. I don't have the authority to do that. Do preachers have authority? Peter made the statement that a pastor, an elder, a bishop is to lead by example, not as lords. That's exactly what Jesus said. He said the kings of Gentiles exercise lordship, which is authority. What Peter said is that the pastor doesn't have any authority. And that not just of the pastor, but that of the members as well. Nobody has the right to say, well, we're going to do this, or we're not going to do that, or we're going to have this thing, we're not going to have that thing. Nobody's got that place or that power of authority. The church has the authority. And so the church is to be the one to make the motion. But there again, the whole point was that the disciples were saying, I'm going to be the head man. I'm going to be the one in charge. I'm going to run the show. And Jesus is saying, no, you're not. No, you're not. And the strife has become and has come because we're trying to exalt ourselves and because we're trying to lift ourselves up to a place that our will is going to be done in the church when that's not the case at all. By the way, we may ask the statement, we say, well, what did the devil have to do with this anyway? Well, look at verse 31. And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan had desired to have you, sift you as wheat. Now, he's telling you that's intimidation right there. He's been manipulating. And the next thing Jesus said is he wants to have you to sift you as wheat. Peter said, of course, he said, go ahead and turn over to 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Of course, we know how Peter reacted to that. He thought he was well enough to be able to handle it, and he was not. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 12. 1 Corinthians 1:12. Turn to another scripture here as well. While you're turning, y'all remember James and John? James and John, I don't know, James and John came to Jesus. I don't know if their mother was with them or maybe she asked a separate occasion, but they were seeking to be, when Jesus came into the kingdom, to be one on one hand and one on the other. In other words, when Christ is the king, they wanted to be his second and third, man in charge right there. And Jesus said, you don't know what you're asking for. In other words, their vision of what was about to take place, everything that they wanted was based on what they thought was about to happen, but what they thought was about to happen was completely wrong. And so they were wanting something completely amiss because they thought they knew something that they absolutely did not know. And Jesus is saying and telling them here, look, y'all, you don't know what you're asking for. And the kingdom now is taking, of course, it's completely different. The kingdom's coming one day, and we know they'll sit on 12 thrones, just as Jesus told them to, that they would. But things did not work the way they thought it did. And because that they allowed themselves, and they thought they knew, and they thought they had the ideas, and they lifted themselves up because of their pride, they exalted themselves to a place where it became a problem in the church. Now, verse 12, it says here that now this I say, that every one of you saith, I'm of Paul, and I'm of Apollos, and I'm of Cephas, and I'm of Christ. And he says, verse 13, he says, is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Were you baptized in the name of Paul? And I can't tell you exactly. There's something to do with baptism here that's going on. But I think what's taking place is there was a dissension in the church about which ones were saved when who was preaching. In other words, Paul was preaching when I was saved. And so y'all need to listen to me because I got something a little extra because Paul was the one preaching when I got saved. And then maybe another fella comes along and he says, no, sir. He said, I was listening to Jesus himself and I got saved. So y'all need to bow down. Y'all need to listen to what I've got to say. I can be the one to lead. I can be the one to tell y'all which way and this thing, all this kind of thing. Because Christ was the one that was, preaching when I got saved. And then Paul says, is Christ divided? This thing had, because they thought they were somebody based on who was preaching this kind of thing. That's what Paul goes with in chapter 3 when he starts asking them about, who's Paul and who's Apollos. Paul watered, or Apollos watered. Paul's planted, Apollos watered, but God's given the increase. Verse 3, he says, for ye are yet carnal. For whereas there is among you envying and strife and divisions, referring back to what we just read, the envying and strife and divisions, well, what did Paul blame it on? He says, are you not yet carnal? This is coming because what you want. Your lust. Now, the reason I say what you want is because if we're not careful, we can take lust and desires and just kind of, I just got lust and desires. It's what I want. That's lust and desires. What I want. Well, that's what these folks were doing. What I want's more important than what you want, and it's causing issues all down in the church. Now, I'm going to give you one more, and we'll try to bring it to a close, and then maybe tie it back together for a moment. 3 John, the third epistle of John. The third epistle of John. There's a man that's often I don't know if I kind of studied it maybe a little bit from this context, and I was like, well, you know what? There's a lot about Diotrephes that I'm not sure we know exactly. But Diotrephes we have the facts. We have what he did. We have what took place. But we don't have the motivation for it. We don't have what was going on in Diotrephes' heart. I don't know that. It could have been Diotrephes he just had something going on with him, and he just flat wasn't going to listen to nobody, and he was just an awful man. It could have been the case that's kind of often the light that he's painted with, you know. Diotrephes was just an awful man. Well, let's read what he did. Verse 9, he says, I wrote unto the church, but Diotrephes, who loveth to have the preeminence among them, receiveth us not. Wherefore, if I come, I will remember his deeds which he doeth, prating against us with malicious words, and not content therewith, neither doth he himself receive the brethren, and forbiddeth them that would, and casteth them out of the church. Well, that's what he did. But the question is, why did he do it? You know, a lot of times we make the statement, the devil's just trying to tear us up. Look at all the problems we got. Well, if the devil's going to tear us up, he's going to use us to do it. And he's using our desires and our lusts. So let's look at Diotrephes for a moment. So let's take him. The word, he begins to say, he said, I wrote to you, or unto the church, but Diotrephes, who loveth to have the preeminence among them. That's the first thing that John tells us about Diotrephes. Now, everybody, to a degree, enjoys the preeminence. The word preeminence doesn't mean just to have authority, but to be in control. Has anybody got control issues? Like Adam. I hate flying in an airplane. But I love them. I can go watch them take off. I can go sit there and watch them on the runway, all that kind of business. I'd love to fly one myself. You know why I don't like flying in one? Because I'm not the man sitting behind that steering wheel, whatever they call that thing. I want to be in control of it. I didn't think myself to have had as bad a control issues as I did until I flew. And then the Lord helped me see I've got a lot more problems with it than I thought. We all have that in us. It's our nature. Everybody wants to have control to a degree. This man apparently wanted it a good bit. He had a pretty good issue with it. And the problem is not having it. We all have it. The problem is allowing that to be what motivates us to move. And that's what he did. Now, John tells us, he says that this man loved to have the preeminence, and that's just control in the church. Now, let me say this. There's a lot of people, in every church I've ever pastored to some degree or another, there's always been a control struggle. There's always been a battle because we're people. That's just the way things work. And that's just the way folks are. There's always been a bit of a problem with preeminence in a church. And to understand that for a moment, and then to think, well, we all have problems with it. But most of the people that I've had to deal with that have had problems with preeminence haven't been people that are just really awful. And I don't think that Diotrephes was like that. The point that I'm making is I think he could have, maybe don't think, he could have been, it could have been the case, because we don't know the motivation, it could have been the case that Diotrephes was a very sincere man. And maybe he was pretty sharp. And maybe he thought he knew what was best for the church. And so he wanted to control because he's seeing the church go a direction that he didn't want it to go. And he thought it best not to go. And so the point that I'm making is that maybe Diotrephes had a problem with preeminence, but maybe it was coming from a sincere place. But even if it's coming from a sincere place, it's still wrong. Because this man, even if he were sincere, which is very possible, had gotten to the place with his control that he had rejected John, because John had standing against him, the disciple whom Jesus loved. And here Diotrephes is, and maybe he's sincere in what he's doing. And maybe he earnestly believed with his heart that what he was doing was right. But because of his failure to understand the will of the Lord, but because of his blindness to the truth of what the Lord really intended, just like the disciples, in the kingdom, just because he didn't understand completely. He's now aligned himself not only against the church, but aligned himself against the man that God was using to bless the church, which was John, so much so that it says that he was parading against us with malicious words. He was running him down. I'll tell you this and just leave it with you for something that I've had to see a couple of times as well. Be careful what you say about a minister. Not just in your own private time or between you and your husband. And I know that wife, whatever the case may be, and you know this, you understand the case of the bishop being worthy of Abdullah. I don't have to get into all of that. The point that I want to make is that if you're not real careful, Ma Ingalls used to make a statement that she said little pitchers have big ears. And she would always tell Pa, she'd say, don't talk right now. And I always tell Krista that she'll remind me of that from time to time. She'll say, little pitchers. Means we're having a conversation that would be better to just not have right now. And I've had to see a time or two that somebody come back and say, you know what, I should have never said what I said because I said it in front of my child and they heard it, and then that man came to preach the gospel and my child wouldn't listen to him because of what they said. I don't know where Diotrephes stood, but if he had certainly led his family. There may have been some at the church he's led, some completely astray, that he's parading against John the disciple. All simply because of his issues with control. The devil has used this man to bring a strife into the church. The devil didn't just attack this church straight on in some physical way. No, he used Diotrephes. The reality that I'm trying to bring to us tonight is that if we're not extremely careful, I could be the next one that he uses to cause a division, to cause a strife in the church. And I don't want to do that. Not just for the sake of me and my family, for the sake of the church, but also for the sake of those that are lost. That we need to be in unity. And I've got things I want. I've got things I want to see for Lone Star. I'm going to tell you, I've got high hopes. And I know what the Lord can do here. And I believe he's going to. But at the end of the day, what I think and what I feel and what I hope are not important. What does Christ want? Because he's the head. He's the true authority. And the question that I've got to ask myself is not, is it like I want it, but is it like Christ wants it? And if it's like Christ wants it, then I have only one option. I'm going to have to submit to it. Whether I like it or not, I'm going to have to submit to it. There have been times I have watched churches pick out colors and stuff, and I'm just like, what in the world? That's hideous. But that's okay. If that's what everybody wants, it's fine. It's fine. We've all faced times that we've seen that before. And the question is not, do we want something different? The question is, like Christ asked those disciples, will you submit? Not my will be done, thy will be done. And that's where we'll find unity. That's where we'll find ourselves all together. And I believe when we find that place, then we'll find the blessings of God. When we unify ourselves in Him while we have a verse of a song.